Hey there, race fans. It's Race Day Top 5 with me, Frank 5. Michigan Speedway. It's fast. It's furious. But this weekend, we not only had speed, we had Mother Nature play a factor, which caused us to win this weekend's race, the beginning on Sunday and the rest of it today. But this weekend, we saw a lot of topsy-turviness on the track regarding some key contenders falling to the wayside, a lot of comers and goers throughout the race, and one of the most successful teams over the years in Michigan that had taken a step backwards returns to victory lane here for the first time in 10 years with the guy that won last weekend. Let's get into all that went down in Michigan today. Number one, Chris Buescher. He's on a roll right now. Chris Buescher, after winning his first race of the season last week at Richmond in very impressive fashion, coming from 26th to the lead, captured today's, latter half of the race push to Monday. The FireKeepers Casino, 400 at Michigan, holding off Martin Truex Jr., Denny Hamlin, Brad Keselowski, and Kyle Larson for the victory. Unbelievable what Chris Buescher's on right now. I mean, they're on a good streak. RFK is rising right now. I never expected this. Now, listen, we all know that RFK has had a big turnaround this year from where they were a year ago. But we didn't expect them to win back-to-back races this year. I mean, kudos to the 17 car. They had a good race car all weekend. They didn't really have the track position at the start of the race, but they were a formidable top 10 driver for the majority of the race. But by the time we got to the start of the final stage, they were one of the few drivers that elected to stay out because they were on a different strategy compared to a few drivers. There's a lot of different strategies going on in the race this weekend, not just the first part of yesterday's race, but the rest of the race today as well. There's a lot of mixed bag of strategies. Buescher stayed out at the start of the final stage by just about 20 laps fresher, older tires than everybody else that had pitted behind him at the start of the final stage. And he was racing hard with Tyler Reddick and, of course, a hard-charging Martin Truex Jr. for the most part. But the speed was in that 17 car. You could see the entire day when he had the clean air, he had the car to pretty much hold off anybody, despite the challenges. He had those challenges at the beginning of the final stage from Tyler Reddick. And then when we got into a big run at the end of the stage, and he had Martin Truex Jr. pressuring him, Buescher still did everything and held off those guys with no problems whatsoever, despite running into some lap traffic at times, including the 62 of Austin Hill, which he was not happy about, and asked, is he even on the Joe Gibbs Racing payroll? Because he kept holding him up for a few laps to allow Truex to close the gap, but it didn't really happen. Despite a challenge, Buescher was able to hold off and get his second win of the season, his first back-to-back win in the Cup Series. I mean, we all know that Chris Buescher has been a talented driver ever since he came into the NASCAR scene. It's just taken him quite a while, especially with RFK Racing, a team that's, building back on the rise after years where they were not among one of the top teams in NASCAR right now. But Buescher has had a very, very solid season this year. At the beginning of the year, him and Brad were continuously getting top 5s and top 10s and top 15s, just running well. But the last few weeks, we're seeing winning speed from his car as well as BK's car. Now, obviously, Brad would have loved to win his home track today, but to see his driver/teammate do it, it's pretty special. And fun fact, Roush Racing, well, in general, Roush Fenway Racing, before it became RFK, they have not won at this track since Greg Biffle in 2013. And that's when Roush was still relatively at the top of their game as far as being up there racing with the likes of Hendrick and Gibbs and Michael Waltrip Racing when they were around at the time, and RCR with Kevin Harvick in his final year. I mean, Greg Biffle was pretty much carrying the banner because, Carl Edwards was still there, but was kind of almost out the door 2 years later. And, of course, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. was just a rookie that season, for crying out loud. But there's been 10 years since Roush car had won at Michigan. And Greg Biffle was able to get that done that year. And this time, it's Chris Buescher. He now has 2 wins and is starting to build up playoff points. And now it begs the question, is Buescher now officially the dark horse we've been looking for to make a run in these playoffs? Now that he's got back-to-back wins, you can't deny he's on a hot streak right now, and he's done very well for himself. And oh, by the way, the next couple races coming up are road courses, and Buescher has relatively run well at those types of tracks. And of course, Daytona, he's always up front there. So Buescher could get on a real hot streak right here, folks, and be the dark horse contender we're looking for to contend with the likes of Martin Truex, William Byron, Kyle Busch, Kyle Larson, or whoever is possibly considered the favorite right now at this point in time. But a great job by Chris Buescher and Scott Graves this entire weekend at Michigan. Back-to-back wins, and the 17 team, they're on a roll right now. Number 2, MTJ, dominant car all weekend long, but falls short to the 17 car. after a very strong start to yesterday's race, like Martin Truex Jr. had one of the best cars, if not the best car. He dominated the first stage when he took the lead right away from Christopher Bell and Ross Chastain, and he just cruised away with this stage 1 victory. And when we resumed the rest of the race today, in the middle of stage 2, he was kind of a little bit back in the field because he took a different tire strategy to come in and get some tires and fuel. That didn't stop him. That car was a rocket ship. And we had a caution come out with about, I'd say, 16, 17 laps to go in the second stage. Truex pits, restarts in 14th spot. He drives all the way to the front and off of turn 4, side drives the 99 of Daniel Suarez, and robs him of a stage victory. That 19 car was on rails today. Unbelievable speed he had. He got the stage win, beating out Suarez. But when we got to the final stage, the car was still strong. But when he negotiated through some of that traffic, he could hardly run down the top 2 at the time, which was Buescher and Tyler Reddick, because they had about a 4.5 second gap over Truex, and he was still falling back and not really making up much ground. But then we got into a little longer run after he cleared all that traffic and started to catch up to them, and then we had green flag pit stops, which ultimately set the tone for the rest of the race, and Truex was able to catch back up and race with Chris Buescher after one of the other contenders had a problem, which we'll get into in a second. But Truex was pressuring Buescher those final 30 laps with everything he had. I mean, you could tell, even as good as Chris Buescher was out front, and he had a good race car, Truex was the better car, but stuck behind dirtier air of a car that is just as good as you when you have the clean air, it was a little bit of a challenge for him. He tried everything possible, and with about 12 laps to go in turn 22, he got under Chris Buescher for the lead and looked like he was going to have it. But then they got past a lap car, Michael McDowell. Truex lost the car just a little bit, held onto it, and tried to make another run late in the race, and he was gaining on him, but it just wasn't enough time. And lap traffic was one of the reasons why Truex kept closing every single lap, because every time Buescher would catch somebody, Truex would catch him faster because he would pass them at a better place than when Buescher caught up to them. But despite all that, Truex falls short, but nothing to hang your head down. Truex had a great race car this weekend and should be very proud of it. But the bigger news regarding Martin Truex Jr. this weekend didn't really happen finishing second this weekend. The big news happened on Saturday when Martin Truex Jr. announced he's coming back to Joe Gibbs Racing in 2024. After some speculation recently, despite the great year that MTJ has had, would he return for another season of competition? Because, you know, he's getting up there in age. He's still in his early 40s and everything. You don't know how much longer you've got left in the sport. Well, Martin Truex Jr. still feels like he's competitive and he's winning races right now and he's having fun. He's coming back for another year at Joe Gibbs Racing. It's not a multi-year deal. It's just a one-year deal. And I pretty much feel that's the way it's going to be for this year, obviously for next year, and possibly could be for 2025. Just go year by year until you decide, I'm done and I've had a good career and I'm going to hang up the helmet and fire suit after the end of my career. But Truex is coming back for another season of competition, and I'm happy. I didn't think that this would. I knew that Truex would probably be back next year. The year you're having this year, how can you walk away from the sport right now? Truex is having a great time right now. He's having fun and he's running well. And despite coming up short today, he had a great race car. And it's great to see that he'll be back in the 19 car in 2024 next year. Number 3, Tyler Reddick. Strong race car, but pit road bites them once again. My goodness gracious, Tyler Reddick and pit road just don't get along. Starting off with Reddick's positives of the race. He had a good race car for a lot of the race this weekend, yesterday and today. He was leading at the time of the red flag at the start of the second stage yesterday before the rain came and we pushed the rest of the race back to today. He started up at the front and then he pitted back and got caught back in the traffic because of the different pit strategies, but then found his way back up to the top 5 by the end of stage 2, and then put himself in position, staying out there on that track position at the start of the final stage with Chris Buescher. And those two were gapping the rest of the field, even with the fresh tires that Truex Jr. and Denny Hamlin and those guys had. They were still gapping them. That's how fast those two cars were today. Reddick had the speed to win this race. But when it came to the final round of green flag pit stops, Reddick's team changed all 4 tires. He left the pit road and actually beat the 17 car out. I'm like, here we go. It's going to be Reddick versus Buescher and Truex all the way. Until not even a full lap up to speed, he goes into turn 3. The back end begins to slide and drift, and Reddick has to come down pit road with a flat right rear tire. But that's not the kicker to the issue. They didn't get the right rear wheel tight enough, and the team spent a few laps in the pits having to put that right rear back on. They didn't get the lug tight on the right rear, and he obviously had that crazy save slide in turn 4 before he had to come back down pit road, and ultimately relegated him to a 30th place finish 3 laps down. And he was not happy over the radio. He was livid with the team about the incident, because I've said this the past couple weeks, Reddick's had the fast cars, but what is costing him possible victories? Pit road. It's their Achilles heel right now. And if you want to win this championship, because they're in the playoffs with the win from Coda, you have to eliminate the mistakes on pit road if you're going to be competing for wins and possibly contending for a championship. This cannot last long with this 23-11 team. Not just with him, but Bubba in general. Pit road and pit stops have been the Achilles heel for this race team. You've seen week after week, they have the speed in both of their cars. Reddick, more so, I think, a little bit than Bubba right now, even though Bubba's run very well recently. Tyler Reddick has had amazing speed that can win him a race or put him in the top 5 with a shot at the victory. But pit road, it's always something. Speeding on pit road, commitment line violation, not getting the wheel tight. Remember Nashville? The same thing happened to him today. Thankfully, didn't bring out a caution and change the tone of the race. But again, what can the 45 team in 23-11 do to correct these mistakes and prevent them from happening down the road? The playoffs are just a few races away, folks. We kick it off at the beginning of September at Labor Day weekend at Darlington. And if the 45 team continues to do this, they're not going to go far. And I wouldn't be shocked if there's a possible round 1 elimination like he had last year when he was with RCR. Now, granted, it's a different team, but you have to eliminate the mistakes. And I don't blame Tyler Reddick for being upset. I would be too if I was behind the wheel of that 45 car. You have that good of a race car, and you're contending with Buescher and the fastest car in Martin Truex Jr., you shouldn't have that problem with the right rear not getting tightened up. You should tighten that right rear. Obviously, now there could have been a pit gun malfunction, but it didn't look that way. But when your driver's not happy in the radio, you know you guys messed up big time right there. You cost yourself a chance at a victory or a possible top 3 today. But despite all that, it was a fast race car, but at the end of the day, the result does not replicate what happened to them. Number 4, chaos for a lot of other contenders. Well, we obviously have talked about Tyler Reddick, but there are a few other drivers that were normal front runners that ran into their fair share of issues this weekend. Starting off with yesterday, the first caution came out when Kyle Busch, racing for, I think, the 11th spot with Ryan Blaney going to turn 1, loses the back end, gets around, and hits the outside wall. And he was a little bit upset about it because they knew they had a good race car from practice the day before. They felt like they had a car that could contend. He was the first car out. The next car out was, unfortunately, a guy had recently been put back into conversation of maybe making on points, but it's now in a must-win again, which has really been the case from all year, and that's Chase Elliott. Running in the top 10 when the right rear tire went down in turn 1 and 2, sent him around into the outside wall, 36th place finish. And he's got 3 races coming up, Indy and Watkins Glen, possible wins, because he's a great road course driver, but you don't know, and Daytona's the ultimate wild card. Anybody can win there, but kind of hurt them. They're now 55 points behind, so it's must win right now for the 9 team. And then we had William Byron, who was running very well at the end of the first stage, coming off a turn 4, the back end, or it looked like the car in general just stripped at the track and smacked the outside wall, and he fell back to 13th at the end of the stage, and the damage was enough to break the toe link and everything. They were done for the day, 35th place finish. Then we had Josh Berry driving the 42 car this weekend, because if y'all don't know, obviously Noah Gragson did something on social media, and it did not meet the values of Legacy Motor Club, and they suspended him from the team, and he's been suspended definitely by NASCAR, and I don't think we're going to see him again this year, unfortunately, with the way the year's been for the team. I mean, it's been horrendous. Like, why continue on with the pain right now? But Josh Berry hit the wall when he was in the middle of the pack. He got a little bit arrow loose from the 7-car Corley Joy getting close to him, and the 42 went around, hit the outside wall. Thankfully, Berry was okay, but it was a relatively hard hit for that 42 car. And then we had Christopher Bell going for the lead in turn 1 with Ryan Blaney at the time, Alex Bowman, and the back end goes around and he hits the outside wall. Now, Bell actually was able to continue, and he actually got a top 15 out of this. Despite all that, he was able to finish inside the top 15. That's crazy. But those guys were having their hands full yesterday. I mean, maybe it was the tire compound that we brought this weekend that probably contributed to a lot of these guys losing the back ends of their cars or having some of these issues with these right rear wheel tires. It was absolutely crazy. We had a couple incidents today, not crazy, but there was one obviously to start the final stage where we had Todd Gilliland get contact from his teammate Michael McDowell. He hit the outside wall on the backstretch, and right behind him, Chase Briscoe gets into Alex Bowman, who was having a really good run in general, tipped the 48 into the wall, and ultimately took Bowman out of a chance at a possible top 5, maybe even win, because when he was in front at times, Bowman's car was good. But obviously now, again, must win for the 48 car, and they've been on a downslide really ever since he's come back from his vertebrae injury, and it's sad, really. But a lot of guys had their hands full, like guys that you would expect to be running up at the front of notable names, had their hands full with some of these incidents that took him out of contention and plainly just took him out of the race. It was a really weird and rough day for those guys. And number 5, the racing pride in Michigan. Despite all the craziness, and despite Mother Nature playing a role in this weekend, I thought the racing was outstanding at Michigan. I mean, last year's race was very good. I think this year's was just a little bit better. I mean, you watch these guys on the restarts. The Michigan restarts, we all know, they're so much fun. I mean, they're just as fun as Fontana, because this racing kind of reminded me a lot of that Fontana race from last year. Not the one early this year, although it was a good one. Last year's Fontana race was fantastic. All the comers and goers that we had, guys on differing pit strategies, all the chaos that was going on the track on restarts, guys running to some spins and tire issues. It was crazy this weekend, yesterday and today. It was good racing. I mean, obviously, Martin Truex Jr. had the fastest car, but there were other guys that showed their hands. Denny Hamlin, Ross Chastain when he was up front at times, obviously our winner Chris Buescher, Tyler Reddick when he was up front before that pit incident, Alex Bowman before his problems, Kyle Larson was up front, Brad Keselowski was up front, Bubba Wallace was up front. There was a lot of parity for the most part in this race. We had a lot of guys that were running up front this weekend's race that you don't normally see sometimes. Like, there were times when I saw Corey LaJoie in the top 10. Eric Jones got a top 10, and that team has struggled this year, and it's good for the Byron, Michigan native to come to one of his home tracks, to his home track, and get a top 10 finish. There was a lot of parity with this weekend's racing at Michigan. It was so much fun. The restarts are obviously nuts. Like the last couple years when we had the 550 package, it was real polarizing with the fan base. This race car we've got here with this next-gen car at Michigan, it's amazing. I love it. Great racing, great long-run battles, and the battle for the win at the end between Buescher and Truex was so entertaining, having me on the edge of my seat. It was phenomenal stuff. I really enjoyed the racing in Michigan. I'd like to go out there one day to visit the Irish Hills and, of course, go see a race in Michigan. It's a beautiful track, and it's definitely one you want to go to. And also, if you notice watching the racing today, the surface is getting a little bit bumpy now. Remember we had that repave 11 years ago? We repaved the entire track, and guys were really just fighting for the bottom. You can run a little higher groove than you probably did back then, but you don't want to run too high because there's still not a lot of grip up there to go up there and do things yet. Maybe in the years down the road, but we'll see. But the track's getting a little bit bumpy, but that, I think, definitely provided some good entertaining action in this weekend's race. Now we're off to Indianapolis Motor Speedway. We'll be back home again in Indiana. I know it's not for the Indy 500, it's for the Indy Road Course race, and it might be the last time the Cup Series does the Indy Road Course, because for what I'm hearing, it's not confirmed yet, but NASCAR might be returning to the Oval in 2024, and we'll see what the next-gen car can bring for that race. But let's see what happens for this race, which has honestly been polarizing the last few years with all the chaos on every single restart we seem to have. I mean, the curb coming up in the first time we did it, all the wrecks in Turn 1 in the later stages of last year's race. I mean, I think people are getting a little tired of the road course, so we'll see what happens for this final one. We've got Shane Van Gisbergen's going to come run this race. Remember, he won the street course race at Chicago. Let's see what he does in an actual road course and one of the most iconic race tracks you will ever go to. So we'll see what happens. Will SVG repeat the dominance that he had late at the Chicago street course and get another victory? Will Tyler Reddick be able to win this upcoming race like he did 1 year ago? Or will AJ Allmendinger show his hand as a strong road course race? Will Chase Elliott? Will Kyle Larson? Will Kyle Busch? Or Michael McDowell, because he runs well road courses? We shall see. Well, let's hope we have a much more tame and entertaining race this time. You know, as I say that, they'll probably still go crazy next weekend. We'll see what happens, but I'll be looking forward to seeing what transpires on the track. So I hope you'll have a wonderful weekend. Subscribe, like, and congrats to Chris Buescher and the 17 team on back-to-back wins, winning this weekend at Michigan. Have a great rest of your week, everybody. Let's go racing.